Welcome to Books in the World, brought to you by the Cape Cod Writers Group for over 50 years. I am Pamela Kirinelli, and today we are delighted to be interviewing author B.A. Shapiro. Ms. Shapiro, a New York Times best-selling author, has written 8 novels, 4 screenplays, and a nonfiction book. Many of us are familiar with The Art Forger and The Muralist, and now her latest novel, which debuted last October, is The Collector's Apprentice. B.A., let's talk briefly about how did you come to be a writer?
Well, it's a long story. I'll try and do it as quickly as possible. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be an artist. And my parents were very supportive. And my father built me a little studio, and I took classes. Unfortunately, it became clear really early on that this is not where my talents lay. So I needed to come up with something else to do. And I was a voracious reader, and I read the book A Wrinkle in Time and loved it. So I went running up to my mother. Now I know what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be Mrs. Whatsit, that character who can bend time and space. And my mother, very supportive, but she had to tell me I couldn't be Mrs. Whatsit. So I said, can I write books about Mrs. Whatsit? And she said, sure, be a writer. So I became a sociologist. And it wasn't until 3 careers later that I ultimately went back to what I had wanted to do as a little girl. And now, you know, this is the best career ever.
I think there was a paragraph somewhere about you and your mom saying to you what you should be, what you ought to be doing now.
So, do you want me to tell that
Yes,
story?
yeah.
So, I was running the Boston office of a software development company, and I was traveling a lot and had a lot of people working for me. And I had my second child, and it was like, Superwoman is dead. I don't know I don't know how I can keep doing this. So I was having lunch with my mother one day and whining, as daughters are wont to do. And I said, if I'm not Superwoman, I don't know who I am. And she said, or she asked, if you had 1 year to live, what would you do? And I said, I would write a novel and spend more time with my children. So that was what I did.
That's a wonderful story, and look where it led you to.
Yeah.
So we were curious about your name, which, and many readers are. Barbara Shapiro, early on, became B.A.
That's correct. What people assume that the B.A. is to hide the fact that I'm a woman, but that actually isn't the reason. I wrote 5 novels that were psychological suspense under Barbara Shapiro, and they were published by major publishers, HarperCollins and Avon Books. But nobody read them, and they had very poor sales. So when The Art Forger was coming out and I had a different publisher, they suggested that I change my name, because the first thing that bookstores and libraries do when a new book comes out is check to see what the sales were on your previous books. So Barbara's sales weren't very good, but B.A. didn't have anything, so we were raring to go, and apparently it worked.
It does work. It's a great name. So your book now, The Collector's Apprentice, which incidentally appears in paperback now, correct?
Yep,
And it looks
just
a
came
little
out.
different, blue
Very
with an
different.
Eiffel Tower on the cover. The Collector's Apprentice is set in 1920s Paris, and it's described as an inventive mystery that features historical figures Gertrude Stein and Henri Matisse, and it's a tale about the lengths to which people will go for their obsession, whether it be art, money, love, or vengeance. Publishers Weekly wrote, a clever and complex tale of art fraud, theft, scandal, murder, and revenge. Readers will be swept away by this thoroughly rewarding novel. So why don't you tell us a little more about The Collector's Apprentice?
Well, it takes place in the 1920s in Paris and in Philadelphia. And it's very, very loosely based on 2 real characters, Albert Barnes and Violette DiMaggio. I don't know if you're familiar with the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia.
Yes.
but there's 3,000 pieces in there, and at one point, it was the largest private collection of post-impressionist work. And Albert Barnes was a brilliant man. He had a great curatorial eye. He discovered, he brought post-impressionism to the United States. But he was also a bit of a jerk and a blowhard and a very colorful character. And he had this very mysterious assistant, Violette DiMaggio. Nobody knew what their relationship was or what was going on.
And where do they meet?
Well, in my book, I fictionalize them,
Yes.
and they meet in Gertrude Stein's salon, of course, because Gertrude Stein's salon is kind of the centerpiece of the book. It's where almost all of the characters meet and interact, and then they go off onto their own. Which this I didn't find out. I actually use kind of statistical methods to write my novels, and one of the things I do is create bubblegrams, which assess the relationship of all the characters. And I didn't realize that Gertrude Stein was that important until I made that chart, and then I realized I had to raise her up into a more major character, which was incredibly fun because she's a hoot.
Yes. What a character.
Yeah.
Right. Now, Violette and had a past as well in the novel.
In the novel.
So
in
why
the
don't you
real
tell us
story,
about
Violette, nobody knew her background.
Oh.
So I decided to give her a rather exciting one. So she grew up as Pauline Mertens, the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in Belgium in the beginning of the 20th century. And she was pampered, and she loved art. There was a great art collection that her father had in their home, and she went to art school. And when she was there, she met the most perfect man. He was handsome and charming and brilliant, and he had this really successful financial empire. And they fell in love, and they got engaged, and we were going to have a big wedding. And she was begging him to let her invest her money in his financial empire. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And then finally he let her, and she made a lot of money. And she said, well, can you let my father? And then can you let his friends? And George resisted all the way and finally gave in. And it's 3 days before the wedding. George disappears, leaves her at the altar, and everybody's money is gone.
Oh my goodness.
So at the beginning of the novel, she's 19 years old, brokenhearted. Her parents think she had something to do with it, so they kick her out, and she is alone in Paris trying to make her way in the world. And that's how the book starts.
Wow, can you imagine being so young and being put in a foreign place to boot?
It was, and this was at a time when women weren't really on their own at all, and
Exactly.
she wasn't taught those kinds of skills, but she went on to do it. She had to change her identity, and she became Vivian Grigsby because people were after her. They wanted her money, so she had to do that on top of everything else. But she's a clever and wily girl.
Oh yes, so she was careful where she appeared and
Yeah.
was always on the
Yep,
watch
yep,
for these people.
yep,
Right.
yep.
And then she met Edwin, and he wanted to build this collection in Philadelphia, and so he thought she would be a good assistant, I think.
And so she went, and all kinds of things happened. You want to hear some of the kinds of things that
Yes,
happened?
go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I write multiple drafts, and it takes a lot of drafts to figure out what you're going to put in and what you're not. So this is a story about Albert Barnes, which is true, and will give you some kind of insight into him. So he had his home in Marion, where the foundation was with all of the artwork, and he had a country home. And he would drive back and forth between these two places. A town in the middle decided they were going to put up a stop sign at an intersection that he went through. And he didn't like it, and he fought against it, but he lost. So he decided he was not going to go through, he was not going to stop. at this stop sign. He was just going to go through it. And this is a true story. You cannot make this stuff up. One night, he drives through the stop sign. A big truck comes barreling down the other way, hits him, and that's how he dies. So like my third or fourth draft, when I was trying to make it a little bit more interesting, I thought, what if it wasn't an accident? What if somebody set it up? And what if that person happened to be Vivienne, who was in line to inherit the entire collection? So that's one of the things that happened.
Now, why was she in line to inherit when he did have a wife, I believe?
Yes,
Ada.
he did, but he did not want to leave. He didn't, in real life, he didn't leave it to his wife. She wasn't interested in the collection. Well, this is what Vivienne tries to do. She was conned by George, and now she's trying to get revenge on him, and he keeps coming back and forth, and she starts learning from him how to get what she wants and how to con, and what she wants is that collection. And so that's how it happened in the fictional world of The Collector's Apprentice.
It's interesting. One of these themes is that we see only what we want to see, and that we're easily swayed by outward appearances. And that had to do with the artwork as well as the characters in the novel. So, but there are the love stories mixed in too, with all the mystery.
Right. And the seeing what we want to see, that's all about the con men, as well as you say, the art. George he's so awful. He's the con man extraordinaire, and I love him, and I hate him, and I'm just fascinated by the workings of his mind and by the emptiness of his soul. He's so awful.
You obviously enjoyed writing about him.
Yes, I loved writing about him, and getting into his personality and trying to understand how the sociopath con men actually work. And so he has like 5 or 6 different identities in the book. Yeah, he's George, he's Tex, he's
Tex is
Istvan.
A cowboy figure.
Yeah, a cowboy figure. He's he's French, he's American, he's British, he's just so good at all of this.
And he goes on and keeps taking people's money.
He keeps on these great cons, and even when he fails, he thinks he wins. And it becomes a con and counter-con between him and Vivienne. And that was also really, really fun to do.
And now what's happening with Vivienne while this is going on? She's in Philadelphia, but she's also...
in Philadelphia, and she and Edwin go back and forth to Paris to buy more paintings. And that's where she meets Henri Matisse. And they fall in love, which Edwin doesn't like because he's also in love with her. But Edwin has a wife, and Matisse has a wife, and so there are all of these different triangles that are going on. And that was really fun too. That was really fun.
Now, the majority of the story is told from Vivienne's point of view, and yet parts are told in the beginning where she was the younger Pauline, and at the end when she's the older Vivienne, with little chapters put in by George in one of his characters, whoever he is at the moment. So that's really interesting to see the whole picture of everybody.
That's what I like
seeing.
To do that. So in this case, usually the way my books are structured, I have a number of different viewpoint characters. In this book, yes, there's George, he's the alternative, but Vivienne actually is 3 different characters, even though she's the same person. So Pauline is actually Vivienne when she's young, and then the majority of the book takes place when she's Vivienne in the 1920s, and then part of the book takes place in the very late 1920s and early 1930s when she is on trial for Edwin's murder. And they're broken up, so it's not like they follow linear time. I like to play around with time. And then George is thrown in there too.
It gets very suspenseful as you read on, and you can't quite figure out what are George's true feelings for Vivienne/Pauline. Now, what inspired you to write about this period, 1920s Paris? What was it?
Do you really need an inspiration to write about?
No, you don't, but maybe our readers are curious.
It was just this phenomenal moment in time in that city. So, like at Gertrude Stein's salon, there's Hemingway, there's Fitzgerald, there's Matisse, there's Picasso, everybody. I mean, it was just, I'm actually fascinated by these certain moments in time and place where it seems that, you know, a whole bunch of creative people are there and they converge, and then all of these things happen. In my book, The Muralist, is the same thing in late 1930s New York with the artists, Rothko and Pollock and Krasner and de Kooning and Hoffman. They were all there at the same time. So I was just fascinated by that. And, you know, who doesn't love Paris? And it was very sad, though. I had to make a trip there in order to do research. And it was just terrible. But, you know, you have to do things.
Right,
you know,
cafes, croissants.
Yeah, really, art museums. Had to look at everything Matisse ever painted. Yeah, it was terrible. But I did it for the sake of my
suffered for your art.
I did.
Now, at that time, as the readers probably understand, the Impressionists had seized the helm of the art world, and they had rebelled against the Academy.
Exactly.
And the very traditional style.
Right.
And but something was underfoot, and now we have the post-Impressionists coming in who want to change the style of the Impressionists because they didn't feel it was solid enough, maybe. So you had Cezanne putting some shapes in his still lifes. And
yeah. I am also really fascinated by the evolution of art and how artists stand on other artists' shoulders and then they do something new and where it goes. So the post-Impressionists were a combination of a series of different experiments in style, from Seurat's dots to Matisse's colors to Cezanne's perspective. And
then you had Gauguin in there.
Yeah, and then you have all kinds of people
and personalities.
And also Picasso.
Yes.
Is considered a post-Impressionist, and the Cubists went off. So it's like it's like this branching, you know, and going off in all of these different directions. And Matisse is kind of at the center of all of it. So I made more charts. I had to chart out exactly how all of this worked. And so the Impressionists were playing with light, but it was still realistic. And the post-Impressionists started moving away from realism in terms of color. Matisse's skies are purple. In terms of perspective, a lot of it is very flat. Things are exaggerated. Colors are layered behind each other. And they're starting to get at the feeling of the emotion of the artist that is being transformed or translated to the viewer.
Right.
And then the abstract expressionists went beyond that. And it's just so interesting how it works.
How art and then later on becomes affected by wars.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating reflection. Right.
You know.
And Picasso changing his style every 10 years, which many people don't realize. He kept moving with the times.
No, he started out as a realistic painter.
So I would say it sounds like Gertrude Stein was one of your favorite characters in this book, historically. And I caught an interview with you when I was researching you, where you had said the difference between being a historical fiction writer versus a history writer, I think, and then a romance, historical romance writer. And that was kind of funny. Would you like to say, especially about the difference between not being a pure historian, but where you interject your own characters with historical ones into the book?
It's really fun, especially when you choose really fun characters like Gertrude Stein.
Oh, yes.
And what I do is I do a lot of research on the characters. You know, I read books, I do whatever there is that I can do. And then I think sometimes of that I'm like an actor, and I've done all this research, and now I have to act the part. Like I have to become Gertrude Stein. And when I write about her, I'm writing from inside her. And so the things that she says, and it's the same with Matisse and Picasso and everybody else, I've done the research enough to know that, to believe that this is something they might have said or they might have done in the fictional circumstances I put them in. But I'm not constrained by the total reality. Right. When I first started this book, I had I had Albert Barnes and Violette as real characters. That I didn't fictionalize them. And, you know, it was boring. So I fictionalize them so I can make them more interesting.
And it is, and it's, I think that two things that goes back to one of your previous careers in research. Research is so important to the process. But also a bit of theater, you know, looking at the people and imagining what they would have been like. So I wanted to ask you about art, and because this question has come up about people. Who actually owns the art when someone purchases a piece of art? And what becomes of it? And are we obligated to share it with the public? Because we see that today. A lot of wealthy folks hide their art away.
This is the theme of the book, is who owns art. And so what happened with Albert Barnes is that originally he was going to have a museum and open up all of his art to the public. But then people in Philadelphia made fun of him and said he was a fool because everybody knows the sky isn't purple and there's more than two dimensions, and they made fun of the post-impressionists. So he said, okay, no one's going to see it, just the people that I care about, and I'm going to make it a school, and I'm going to pick out all of the people. And in his will, he said everything had to stay exactly the way it was, and nothing could be moved, nothing could be changed, and it was still a private collection. And then it got moved through many, many years and many, many lawsuits. It was moved and made into a public museum. On one hand, you know, he bought these paintings. They belong to him. He wrote a will. We're in a capitalist society. On the other hand, who owns art? It's a cultural artifact. Shouldn't somebody who buys a piece of art be the custodian to turn it over to future generations and to allow people to view it and see it and think about it? So it's, you know, I saw both sides of the question. And I don't think there is an answer, but in this book I play around with the different pieces of it so that if someone's in a book group, they can discuss who owns art. Should they have moved it or not? You know, is it his or is it ours?
I used to think about that with Vincent van Gogh, and if you know, sometimes you'd see an exhibit, say in the Metropolitan, and then you'd go into the gift shop of the museum, and there's the Van Gogh tie,
and the mugs,
the Van Gogh, or the Van Gogh cutting board for cheese, and I thought, with all he suffered, how would he feel when he's not making the profits off these sales of these objects? But somebody is benefiting, and you know, and some children or someone is seeing these works because
that's true.
They're,
you know, it's true.
Prints,
but
at least.
You know, is it a bastardization of it? I mean, that's the question.
Yes.
Is it?
I know.
You know, I know the mugs. Like Albert Barnes. So he only wanted people to look at the paintings. No little white cards. No docents. No tours. No nothing.
Interesting.
And when they moved the museum, docents and tours, and obviously there's a store, and you can buy a mug with Matisse's Joy of Life on it. And that guy would not be just rolling over in his grave. He would be leaping in huge circles if he saw that mug.
And now did you fictionalize the fact that he displayed all those hardwares and
No, that's
things?
all true.
Oh, is it?
That's all true.
Go ahead.
Pretty much everything about the museum and the artwork in the book is true. I took what was about 60 years and squished it into 10
Yes.
and changed names and things, but the art piece of it is
That he
is almost
displayed
all.
these
That's the
objects
way he did
around
it
the
on
great
these
paintings,
ensembles,
and
yes,
even
and
to the
that would-
shock of Vivian.
Yes,
Yes.
right.
Yeah. So as the book goes on toward the end, I was surprised to see one of George's identities. He builds up an art collection, and Vivian and he meet up again. And I'm not going to say anything else, but I
Good
was
plan.
totally held into the suspense of this novel with
Great.
the possibilities of different endings, and the way it did end is total surprise to me.
Oh, good.
And I loved it. I
what I
just
like.
loved everything about it.
Thank you.
So it was a surprise, definitely. So I just wanted to say that you can get BA's books at most bookstores, your local library, Amazon. Some also available in ebook and audio book.
It's available any way you want it.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you wish to say to writers, BAs, like keep plugging away, or just there will always be rejections, I suppose, but that's one person's point of view. I mean,
I've written 13 novels, and 8 of them have been published. So I have a lot of rejections. My 2 pieces of advice: one is let yourself write it wrong, because you can just keep rewriting it. And that allows you the creativity and the freedom. Don't get bogged down in the sentences. My other piece of advice is get your butt in the chair and stay there.
right, and not be distracted.
Right.
Well, that's wonderful advice, and thank you, BA, for
Thank you.
being here today and joining us. The Collector's Apprentice is published by Algonquin Books, and you can learn more at www.algonquincom.com if you wish. And I am Pamela Carinoli with Books and the World.
Thank you.
Thank you.